There was something about opening up the application portal to that decision that didn't seem real. I felt a level of imposter syndrome I had never felt before, and not just because I was already emotionally set on spending the next 2 years of my life in Santa Barbara. Part 1 of this series was about my unlikely path to UC Berkeley, for those who genuinely care how I got here. This is the sequel where I talk about life at UC Berkeley. Let's rewind to summer 2010, the summer of counting down the days to finally escaping Sacramento. I mean, moving to Berkeley.
Greetings, loved one.
Write you a song.
The iPad.
I better find you. I think I won't stop, baby. Won't see my name in shining light.
The first week in Berkeley can best be described as hectic. With 6,000 undergrads moving into campus housing on the same day, life feels crowded in a hurry. And UC Berkeley Move-In Day is an event. At least the local news seems to believe it is. And following that Sunday Move-In Day, we got 3 full days before classes began. This gives you enough time to get to know the people on your floor, to try the dining hall food, and to tour the campus. Then reality hits. I remember my first class being an 8 a.m. math lecture immediately followed by a U.S. history lecture in the same auditorium, which looked like an auditorium you see in many college lectures and movies.
Professors. Well, that's all. If you have any questions, I'm sure that Tom has the answers.
I don't actually remember my first day of classes despite having taken these pictures. But I do remember getting trapped in the crowd of students in Dwinell Hall after leaving those lectures. And this scene has since been tattooed in my memory as the image that immediately pops into my head whenever I think of my first day of school. When I finally snaked my way through the crowd and opened the doors to that signature Bay Area gloom, I felt a little more like a Berkeley boy than I did when I woke up. Now it was time to get to business. Many people underestimate how difficult UC Berkeley's academic landscape is. They come from high schools and junior colleges full of elders and peers who praise their every move. And now they have to compete with each other. This means facing grading curves that artificially transform what would have once been your A effort into sometimes a C, D, or even failing effort, depending on what percentage of the class happened to outperform you on that exam. However, I do believe there is a hierarchy of difficulty by type of class. For me personally, I found the reading and writing-based classes to be the easiest, probably because those just come down to reading comprehension and your ability to form an argument when writing an essay. The most difficult part of those classes was simply finding time to do all the reading because some classes had multiple textbooks on top of extra reading packets called readers that look like this. I found the most difficult classes to be the problem set classes, which of course were the science and math classes. Even though I was an art major, I took all of the lower division math courses, because I'm insane, and because this is a callback to part 1 of this series. Anyway, Berkeley has a way of making people who thought they were good at math rethink that confidence. Actually, you can apply this to a lot of different subjects, but especially math. The textbook material, and thus the homework, isn't particularly difficult. In fact, the quizzes feel like the right level of difficulty in a sane world. Speaking of sanity. But the exams, the midterms, the finals, the 2 things that together account for such a high percentage of your grade that everything else you turn in is basically useless outside of how well it's supposed to prepare you for those exams. When you take those exams, you will see maybe one problem that looks kind of like what you saw in your textbook or any prior quiz. Conversely, grade school math enables you to get away with just learning the one way to solve a type of math problem that just magically works on every other problem within that particular math discipline. But college math, you need to understand it on a deep enough theoretical level that you intuitively approach each problem in a way that accurately breaks down the unique barriers each problem presents. I'm not just basing my opinion of the various levels of academic difficulty off of my own experience. I knew a bunch of political science majors and a few American studies majors, and none of them ever complained about the difficulty of their work. But students whose majors required hefty doses of chem, physics, or math, These students always seemed to be in perpetual states of panic over how little they felt they knew the material. I felt bad seeing the faces of people getting their math midterms because I could almost hear the gears in their head turning as they're trying to figure out how they're going to break the news to their parents that they're probably not going to be a doctor or engineer. Then there were the classes that were somewhere in between in difficulty, the project-based classes. That would be your art classes, your architecture classes, and probably any other creative class like film. These classes were not absolutely hard because you'll probably get a passing grade if you just follow the directions of the assignment and turn in something that looks finished. But these classes were not absolutely easy either because the subjective nature of creative disciplines can be difficult to navigate in an academic setting. As an art major, I found that often a student's success simply comes down to how closely their work aligned with the professor's idea of, air quote, good work. As an art major, I spent much of my time right here in Krober Hall and across the way in Worcester Hall. My academic success was likely negatively impacted by a gravitation toward design-style work I would turn in as art projects. The difference between art and design is that art is a form of communication, whereas design is a method for problem solving. This may have been why I took many different classes in the College of Environmental Design, which houses the architecture and urban planning majors. The work I did in those classes made me feel like I was learning skills I could use to make a greater positive impact on the world, not to mention the more obvious job prospects. In hindsight, I realized I could have also made a greater positive impact with my art if I was just better able to generate ideas. I was always confident I could execute most of my artwork decently well, but I lacked the passion behind my ideas that really drives great art. It's one thing to be talented at drawing or painting or sculpting or any other medium. It's another thing to convince the world that a given piece of artwork matters. The videos I create today and put out into the world indicate that I may have become the artist I previously never thought I could.
We're going and we have to start marching, striking, occupying until we make the UC. We want to decide about the UC. Our university! Our university! Our university!
Throughout my Berkeley days, I felt lost. I had no idea what I wanted or needed, or how to cultivate the future version of myself that I wanted. And unfortunately, these foreshadowing scenes of San Francisco off in the distance didn't give college me any clues. I was an art major, yet as a student, I always felt creatively unfulfilled. I was surrounded by people, yet I always felt lonely. And I lived in the middle of the Bay Area, yet I always felt bored. Hoping to fill that void, I attempted to dive into sports. For the first half of September 2010, I trained by myself at Edwards Stadium with aspirations of continuing my track career on Cal's 2011 team. Often I was on the track at the same time that the women's soccer team was on the field. One of those soccer players was this one who got called up by the U.S. national team at the end of that month. And she never looked back.
Shot!
The trade-off to being a student at an NCAA Division I school that regularly spits out great athletes is that the barrier to entry for athletics is incredibly high, and if you're not recruited, then the chances of you making a team are next to zero. After I inevitably gave up on the track and field idea, I practiced with 3 of the school's club sports teams for 2 to 3 weeks each before inevitably losing interest in each of those. The only activity I found remotely interesting was playing pickup basketball in the gym that was $10 per semester for Cal students. Cal basketball players and Cal football players would randomly show up, and occasionally I would find myself in games with this one.
Touchdown Cal Bears! Keenan Allen with his second score of the day.
I'm telling my grandkids that this perennial Pro Bowler that NFL fans watched every Sunday loved to stay in shape by playing basketball against me in his off seasons. In the middle of this intersection between Piedmont Avenue and Channing Way sits this shaggy-looking roundabout. If you draw a radius the length of a city block away from this circle, you'll hit the vast majority of the houses where students practice their underage functional alcoholism. This area is known as Frat Row, which is where the school's Greek life exists. When I was a student, I'd estimate that I went to something like 20 to 30 different parties. Out of all of those parties, I remember one good one okay one, and the rest made me want to leave within the first few minutes. The best way I can describe the vibe of The Good One is the Lenny Kravitz music video, Fly Away. Almost everything about that music video, the colors, the way the sweaty people were dancing, even the wood paneling, that music video nails the vibe of that one college party I remember fondly. If you decide to live in the dorms, this is where many of your core memories as a student will be made. It feels somewhere in between being in a camp or in the military, but not as serious, with the small exception that you're building your entire professional future. In my first year, I stayed in Unit 3, the same housing complex Steve Wozniak stayed in. Steve Wozniak stayed in that building. I stayed in that building. And no, it wasn't at the same time. I know I'm getting older, but I'm not that old. Speaking of old, I could tell by the uncomfortably narrow halls that Ida Sproul was an old building, but it did have views of San Francisco if you were lucky enough to get a room on the west side of the building. And my floor had a lounge, which was the de facto hangout spot for serendipitous bonding with floor mates, which includes pulling near all-nighters with them during finals week. And for more direct bonding with floor mates, we would just pick whoever volunteered their room, or we would go on a hike together. Your floor mates basically become your family, and you may even feel like you've met potential lifelong friends. But I should warn you that you'll learn probably within a few years after graduating just how circumstantial those friendships were, and that you'll be reminded of the harsh reality that those friendships were basically chosen by a computer and not your compatibility. Because similar to high school, you may feel close to them at that moment, but the second you graduate, your odds of seeing any of them ever again will go down significantly as you all forge your own paths into the real world. That may seem sad, but hopefully this message will encourage you to enjoy the time you have with the people around you while you still have it. Because years down the road, you may start to see some of those college friends breaking their social media connections with you as they move into phases of life they don't see you being a part of. And that's okay, because more often than not, people just grow apart. And right now, I seem to be in that post-college era where many of my college friends are getting married, and some have even had kids. What's particularly funny is that I'm older than just about all of those college friends, yet as of this video, I've still never even come close to being in a romantic relationship, which is why the rest of the world is out enjoying their romance while I'm still out here making content about college. Speaking of romance, when it comes to dating at UC Berkeley, I can't exactly speak for women and their experiences, but a conversation I once had with two women in one of my classes can give you some insight. During this conversation, one of the ladies said that men were too afraid to ask her out, and the other lady said that all men seemed to want from her is sex. Now I guess I'll talk about my own dating experience. Despite my 2 years at UC Berkeley intersecting with my brief, unremarkable modeling career, I wouldn't say I was particularly popular among the women on campus. Quite a few of them said I was attractive, and some showed what seemed like legitimate interest initially. But the moment I showed any interest back, their guard would go straight up to the sky. A quick glance at the school's demographics will give you an idea of why the vast majority of them weren't interested in me as a potential partner. My poor socioeconomic background and the fact that I majored in a discipline that didn't exactly signal future financial security wasn't doing me any favors either. It wasn't all bad though, at least during the summers. In summer 2011, a secret admirer occasionally slipped letters into my dorm room. The contact information led me to the Facebook profile of what appeared to be a cute, very shy-looking Korean international student. I was not able to connect with her, so Chloe, wherever you are, I needed more information. Fast forward to my final term, summer 2012, I suddenly started receiving positive attention from women. Of the 5 I remember, 2 of them already had boyfriends, one of them did the aforementioned showing interest only until I show interest back thing, and another I didn't pursue because my roommate had a crush on her. Once in a while you'll hear me mention that there's only one person in my life I've ever been on more than one date with. That would be this 5th one, who coincidentally is also the same woman I mentioned earlier who said that men were too afraid to ask her out. Also coincidentally, around that time there was a hit song by Gautier called Somebody That I Used to Know, and in the second half of that song, you'll see a woman by the name of Kimbra appear. The woman I went on those 2 dates with looked very much like Kimbra in that music video, even down to the hairstyle and skin tone. That music video is a poetic representation of my experience with her because we were both art majors and we're no longer connected in any way today. That probably could have developed into the only relationship I would have ever had if it not been for the poor timing of me having to move away from Berkeley a few weeks later. I had already walked in my graduation before that summer term and was just sticking around that summer to collect some final credits so I could actually graduate. I don't actually remember most of the 2012 graduation ceremony, probably because I got up and left halfway through it. I don't like ceremonies in general, but this one in particular was boring. It was in direct sunlight during an unusually warm day for Berkeley, and we were sitting out there decked in black. By the way, normally these commencements take place at California Memorial Stadium, aka the football stadium, but it was getting renovated at the time. So the 2012 commencement took place at Edwards Stadium, which, in addition to earlier parts of the story, you may remember from the 2023 movie Oppenheimer. Somehow I've never stepped foot inside of Memorial Stadium. Anyway, the commencement address was given by Google Executive Chairman Eric Schmidt, which is, I guess, is some foreshadowing if you know anything about me. The only other notable thing about this hot, boring graduation day was actually the following day when I opened Berkeley's website and this image appeared on the front page. The editor, the photographer, whoever, believed that out of the 3,000 students who walked the stage to receive their fake diplomas, this graduate was the single most photogenic of them all. I had finally found the one thing I was better at than other UC Berkeley students.
It is a disturbing fact to me, and it may be to some of you, that the new frontier owes as much to Berkeley as it does to Harvard University.